By successfully integrating these alternative insect proteins and proving that they do not sacrifice feed conversion efficiency or the health of the fish at those optimal inclusion rates, large-scale producers gain a massive strategic advantage.
You can effectively insulate your massive supply chains against the price spikes and availability issues of traditional marine ingredients.
A whole new era of communication in the global aquaculture industry is coming. Now you have the brightest minds in aquaculture right in your pocket. And what's best? You can listen to all of them while driving to a farm, traveling, or running errands. It's never been this good, and it's never been this simple. Welcome to the Aquaculture Podcast Show, the first AI-based podcast in aquaculture, where you'll find cutting-edge insights in everything that's working in aquaculture, nutrition, health, and production. Inspired by the 2023 article titled Black Soldier Fly Full-Fat Meal in Atlantic Salmon, Nutrition, Part A, Effects on Growth Performance, Feed Utilization, Selected Nutriphysiological Traits in Production Sustainability in Fries, by Mikołajczak, Zuzanna, et al.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today we are going straight into the operational core of commercial aquaculture. We are looking at a really highly significant 2023 study by Zuzanna Mikołajczak and her colleagues.
Right. The paper is titled Black Soldier Fly Full-Fat Meal in Atlantic Salmon Nutrition Part A.
Exactly. And the mission for this deep dive is clear. We are going to unpack the absolute viability of replacing traditional marine proteins with full-fat black soldier fly meal in Atlantic salmon fry diets.
It is a critical topic right now.
It really is. So we're going to explore the hard data on feed physical properties, growth performance, gut histmorphology, and ultimately how this impacts large-scale production sustainability.
Because for you listening, optimizing feed is essentially the single most critical lever you have. You are the ones driving the global aquaculture industry forward, and you need rigorous, applicable data.
Why Genetics turns podcast airtime into brand authority. We don't sell ads, we elevate voices. Curious how far your voice can go to become a reference in the industry and attract more leads? Scan the QR code and discover how we can turn your expertise into unmatched brand authority. Let's transform expertise into influence, starting now.
Yeah, we have moved way beyond the theoretical potential of alternative proteins. What the researchers have done here is provide a highly technical, holistic evaluation.
They did not just look at whether the salmon fry grew. They evaluated the entire production matrix.
Right, from the physical dynamics of the feed pellet itself all the way to the microscopic health of the gastrointestinal tract.
And then they scaled that up to the overarching environmental sustainability metrics.
So let us start right at the feed mill, because before the fish can even utilize the nutrients, the feed has to be manufactured, stored, and, delivered efficiently.
The physical manufacturing is where everything begins.
Exactly. The researchers set up 4 distinct test groups for these diets. There was a traditional control diet formulated with 39% fish meal.
The industry standard.
Right. Then they formulated 3 experimental diets where they replaced portions of that fish meal with full-fat black soldier fly meal.
And those inclusion rates were 5%, 10%, and 15%.
Yeah. But when you introduce a radically novel ingredient like insect biomass, it completely changes what happens inside the extruder.
Oh, absolutely. The physical dynamics of the extruded pellets shifted significantly as the inclusion of the insect meal increased.
Which is a massive operational variable for large-scale production. What kind of physical shifts did the researchers actually observe?
Well, specifically, the pellet bulk density decreased. And concurrently, the sinking velocity, the volume increase, and the expansion rate of the pellets all went up significantly.
I mean, in a commercial setting, those are profound shifts in how the feed behaves once it hits the water column.
They really are. That shift in pellet dynamics is a huge deal for automated systems.
If you are managing a high-volume feeding system, this is exactly where you need to pay close attention. But why does adding insect meal change the physics of the pellet so drastically?
The study points to the specific nature of the full-fat meal.
Right, but how does that actually alter the structure during manufacturing?
The key is that they utilized a full-fat meal rather than a defatted product. During the extrusion process, the feed is subjected to extreme heat and pressure.
Right, standard extrusion.
Yeah, but that higher inherent lipid content in the black soldier fly meal allows for much better oil dispersion throughout the starch and protein matrix of the feed.
Ah, okay. That makes sense.
But we also have to factor in the insect exoskeleton. The exoskeleton is highly fibrous.
So you combine that fibrous nature with the specific lipid profile.
Exactly. During extrusion, it creates a significantly more porous pellet structure once it exits the dye and expands in the ambient air.
So the combination of the dispersed oil and the fibrous exoskeleton basically acts like a scaffolding that puffs up more.
That is exactly what happens. That explains the increased expansion rate and the drop in bulk density.
For the producer, this translates directly to calibration headaches if you are not prepared for it. You need optimal water stability and highly predictable feed delivery.
Because if your feed sinks faster than your baseline, or if it expands differently and becomes more porous, it absorbs water differently.
You have to recalibrate your pneumatic delivery systems and your timing just to prevent feed waste.
Right, if the pellets sink too fast, they drop out of the feeding zone before the salmon fry can strike them,
Ending up as expensive waste in the biofilter or just sitting on the bottom of the tank.
Managing those dynamics is how a facility maintains feed conversion efficiency on a macro scale.
But interestingly, the data from the study showed that water stability remained excellent across all the experimental diets, right?
Yes, the pellets held together beautifully without disintegrating prematurely.
But the physical profile, the actual speed at which they fell through the water, was fundamentally altered.
It is a vital reminder that nutritional formulation does not exist in a vacuum. It is strictly bound by the physics of feed manufacturing.
Definitely. So if we know the feed can physically hold up in the water, the next obvious hurdle is whether the fish will actually eat and convert it.
The biological performance.
Let us look at that during the 60-day growth trial on these Atlantic salmon fry. The sweet spot was clearly the 5% and 10% inclusion rates.
The biological performance at those levels was phenomenal. Achieving parity with a high-quality 39% fish meal control diet is the gold standard for any alternative ingredient.
How did the fry handle those specific levels?
Well, at 5 and 10% full-fat insect meal inclusion, the final body weight, the specific growth rate, and the total feed intake of the salmon fry were statistically indistinguishable from the traditional control diet.
That is huge. There was zero compromise in growth velocity or feed acceptance.
And the feed acceptance aspect is critical. Salmonids can be incredibly picky eaters.
Oh, they will just stop eating. If a novel ingredient changes the palatability, the smell, or the taste of the pellet, they will back off the feed entirely.
And your specific growth rate plummets. But here, they consume the 5 and 10% diets with the exact same vigor as the premium fish meal diet.
The commercial implication there is profound. It demonstrates that producers can seamlessly integrate this alternative protein into their commercial formulations up to that 10% threshold,
without sacrificing an ounce of performance or altering the feeding behavior of the fry.
But, as with all nutritional strategies, we eventually hit a ceiling. In this trial, that ceiling was the 15% inclusion group.
Yes, when the researchers pushed the black soldier fly meal to 15%, we saw some very specific performance drops.
What happened to the fish in that highest inclusion group?
The 15% inclusion rate crossed a physiological threshold for the fry. The researchers recorded a distinct decrease in body weight gain.
Even though they were still eating the feed?
They were eating it, but the protein efficiency ratio and the lipid efficiency ratio were notably lower.
Which mathematically resulted in a higher feed conversion ratio.
Exactly. They were consuming the nutrients, but they simply were not converting them into somatic tissue as efficiently as the fry in the control, 5% or 10% groups.
Before we dig into the biology of why that conversion dropped, we have to highlight a vital technical detail from the researchers' methodology regarding how they measured the protein.
This is crucial.
Because insect exoskeletons contain significant amounts of chitin, which brings in a lot of non-amino acid nitrogen.
Right.
If a feed mill just runs a standard protein estimation and uses the traditional conversion factor, they're going to run into a massive formulation error. How did the researchers handle that?
This is a tremendous point of rigor in this study. Standard laboratory valuations for protein measure total nitrogen and multiply it by a standard factor to estimate the protein content.
But because chitin contains nitrogen, that is not part of an amino acid.
Using that standard factor massively overestimates the actual bioavailable protein in an insect-based feed. It is like counting empty boxes in a warehouse and recording them as viable inventory.
So they corrected for it.
Yes, the researchers actively corrected for this by utilizing a specific calculated nitrogen to protein conversion factor of 5.12.
And that specific number is based on the actual amino acid profile of the black soldier fly biomass?
Exactly. By using that 5.12 conversion factor, they guaranteed that all 4 experimental diets were genuinely isonitrogenous.
meaning they all contain the exact same level of true bioavailable protein.
If they had not made that correction, the performance drop at 15% might have been misattributed to a simple protein deficiency in the diet.
But because they locked in the true protein levels so rigorously, we know the performance drop is due to how the fish are physiologically utilizing the feed.
Precisely.
So knowing the protein levels were accurate, what are the physiological mechanisms driving that dip in performance and feed conversion at the 15% mark?
It comes down to digestibility and enzyme access inside the gastrointestinal tract. The complex polysaccharides in the insect exoskeleton, specifically the chitin, create a physical and chemical barrier.
So as the inclusion rate goes up to 15%, the concentration of these complex polysaccharides reaches a critical level.
Right, a level where they likely begin to bind to or physically block the availability of the protein for the protease enzymes in the gut.
So the high-quality protein is physically present in the feed matrix, but the salmon fry's digestive enzymes simply cannot access it efficiently.
They cannot break it down into absorbable amino acids. That mechanism perfectly explains the lower protein efficiency ratio.
That makes total sense. But we also have to look at the lipid side of the equation because this is a full-fat meal.
It brings a substantial amount of fat into the diet.
And black soldier fly larvae are naturally very high in lauric acid, which is a medium-chain fatty acid.
Which is very different from marine lipids.
Exactly. How does the specific metabolism of salmonids handle a sudden influx of lauric acid compared to the long-chain fatty acids they typically get from marine sources?
The lauric acid profile provides a brilliant explanation for the lipid efficiency data. Salmonids are highly efficient at utilizing medium-chain fatty acids like lauric acid, but their metabolic pathway for it is very specific.
They burn it.
They utilize medium-chain fatty acids by readily oxidizing them for immediate cellular energy. They prefer to do that rather than depositing it as long-term fat reserves in their muscle tissues or liver.
So they're basically using that lauric acid as rocket fuel for immediate energy rather than using it as building blocks to add mass to their bodies.
That is the exact metabolic pathway. Because they are rapidly oxidizing that lauric acid for energy, there is less total lipid being deposited into the biomass of the fish.
Which perfectly explains why the researchers observed a reduced lipid efficiency ratio and marginally lower fat digestibility in the 15% group.
The fish were actively using the fat, they just were not storing it as weight gain.
And crucially, this specific metabolic oxidation pathway does not cause any physiological harm to the fish.
None at all.
That leads perfectly into one of the most exciting findings of the entire deep dive.
The gut health.
Yes. Even with that slight growth and conversion dip at the highest inclusion rate due to the chitin and the lauric acid, the gut health of the salmon fry remained absolutely pristine across all the experimental groups.
Which is a massive win. When the industry tries to introduce novel plant-based proteins, we often see severe enteritis or morphological degradation in the gut.
Which just ruins the absorptive capacity of the fish.
But the histomorphology data presented in this study is incredibly strong. The researchers meticulously measured the microscopic intestinal structures, and they found absolutely no negative alterations.
Let us break down what they were looking at. They measured the villus height and the villus width.
Right, and the villus are essentially microscopic, finger-like projections that line the intestine. Their primary job is to maximize the surface area for absorbing nutrients.
If those villi shorten, fuse together, or degrade, which is a classic sign of soybean meal-induced enteritis, the fish loses its ability to absorb the feed.
No matter how perfectly formulated the pellet is.
But in this trial, the villi in both the proximal and distal intestines were perfectly healthy and completely consistent with the control group.
Furthermore, the muscular layer thickness of the intestine remained normal. There was no abnormal thickening, which is usually a sign of chronic inflammation.
So the absorptive surface area remained highly intact and functional across all the insect meal inclusion levels.
And when they zoomed out from the microscopic level and looked at the overall organ health through the somatic indices, the result backed up that pristine gut health.
Right. The viscerosomatic index, which measures the proportion of internal organs relative to total body weight.
And the hepatosomatic index, which specifically looks at the liver size relative to the body weight, everything remained completely stable.
There was no sign of abnormal fat buildup in the liver and no organ swelling. The physiological condition of these fry was excellent.
There is a fascinating layer to that stellar gut health that goes beyond just the absence of inflammation, though.
The antimicrobial peptides.
Exactly. The insect biomass naturally contains bioactive compounds, specifically antimicrobial peptides. The study suggests that these antimicrobial peptides might actually be positively modulating the gastrointestinal tract microorganisms.
So we're not just providing raw macronutrients to the fish, we are potentially optimizing the entire microbial environment of the gut.
By keeping the harmful bacteria in check and promoting a healthy balance of microorganisms, the feed is doing double duty.
It is a highly valuable secondary benefit of utilizing whole insect meals.
By naturally supporting a healthy balance of gastrointestinal tract microorganisms through these inherent antimicrobial peptides, the insect meal may be providing a prophylactic effect.
It helps maintain that pristine gut architecture and overall resilience, even when the digestive system is processing novel, complex carbohydrates like chitin.
It is a really elegant biological synergy.
So let us elevate this from the biology of the fish to the macro level of global production. We have seen the data proving the feed can be manufactured effectively.
We know the fish perform identically to the control diet, up to a 10% inclusion rate.
And we know their internal organ and gut health remains flawless. What does this mean for production sustainability and the trajectory of the global aquaculture industry? Because this feels like a massive pro-agriculture victory.
It absolutely is. The true metric of scalability in our industry is how efficiently we utilize our raw materials. The researchers calculated the fish in, fish out ratio for these production models.
And the fish in, fish out ratio basically measures how many kilograms of wild marine fish are required to produce 1 kilogram of farmed salmon.
Correct. By utilizing the 5 and 10% black soldier fly meal diets, the researchers significantly reduced the reliance on marine-derived fish meal required for each unit of growth.
That reduction is the ultimate goal of commercial aquaculture scaling. We want to aggressively expand our global production capacity to meet the world's increasing demand for premium seafood.
But we cannot achieve that kind of exponential growth if our supply chains are tethered entirely to the natural limits and extreme market volatility of wild-caught marine ingredients.
The fish meal market is subject to quotas, weather patterns, severe price shocks.
By successfully integrating these alternative insect proteins and proving that they do not sacrifice feed conversion efficiency or the health of the fish at those optimal inclusion rates, large-scale producers gain a massive strategic advantage.
You can effectively insulate your massive supply chains against the price spikes and availability issues of traditional marine ingredients.
It provides a buffer. It guarantees that the aggressive expansion of commercial aquaculture can continue without hitting a raw material bottleneck that halts production.
It is a profound validation of agricultural innovation. We are taking sustainable, scalable agricultural byproducts, cycling them through incredibly efficient insects like the black soldier fly, and creating a high-value, highly digestible protein.
That protein then flawlessly replaces volatile marine resources in top-tier seafood production.
That is the agricultural sector operating at its absolute finest, turning low-value inputs into premium, sustainable outputs.
It proves definitively that environmental sustainability and peak commercial performance are not mutually exclusive concepts in aquaculture.
When alternative feeds are formulated with technical precision like correcting for non-amino acid nitrogen, and when the physical pellet dynamics are understood, sustainability and performance actively reinforce each other. To summarize the critical operational takeaways for you, utilizing a carefully calibrated 5 to 10% inclusion of full-fat black soldier fly meal is a highly viable, commercially ready, and vastly more sustainable replacement for traditional fish meal in Atlantic salmon fry diets.
The rapid growth is there, the feed conversion efficiency is there, the gut health is pristine.
You just have to actively manage the physical pellet dynamics, the porosity, the sinking velocity, the expansion when you are calibrating your extruders and your automated feeding systems on the farm.
It requires precise execution and anticipation at the feed mill, but the biological and economic returns on the farm are clearly documented in this data. The fish will perform if the feed is delivered correctly.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final, forward-looking question to ponder. This study focused entirely on the freshwater fry stage of the Atlantic salmon.
Right.
But we know their life cycle demands a massive, fundamental physiological shift as they move from the freshwater hatcheries to the open ocean net pens, a highly complex process known as smoltification.
That transition is one of the most stressful periods in the salmon production cycle, and it raises an important question regarding long-term physiological programming.
Exactly. Does introducing these novel insect proteins, those complex polysaccharides like chitin, and those antimicrobial peptides at the very early fry stage permanently alter their metabolic flexibility?
Does it permanently program their gastrointestinal tract microorganisms to be more robust or adaptable for the remainder of their production cycle when they're transferred out into the harsh ocean environment?
Could early exposure to black soldier fly meal actually build a superior, more resilient smolt?
That is the frontier of nutritional programming. If early dietary interventions can structurally prepare the gastrointestinal tract microorganisms to better handle the physiological stressors of smoltification and the marine grow-out phase, the value of these alternative proteins multiplies exponentially across the entire production cycle.
It is an area completely ripe for the next wave of commercial research.
It certainly is, and it is exactly the kind of technical question that will keep driving our industry's incredible momentum forward.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep pushing the boundaries of aquaculture production, and thank you for tuning in to the Aquaculture Podcast Show to elevate your expertise. We will see you next time.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow the Aquaculture Podcast Show on your favorite platform. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook to stay updated on the latest episodes and industry insights. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.